La Dispute.
Wildlife! Hello, my needle drops. Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for an album review. These guys are a Michigan band, second album, and I think my first reaction to them was pretty bad, pretty negative. I heard them in a blog TV, and I think I just felt like their music was annoying, overly dramatic, overly emotional, whiny. But since they put out this sophomore album, I've been listening to it, and I've done a bit of a 180 with these guys. Now, these dudes get labeled as post-hardcore a lot, but don't worry, this is not your crappy, average, modern post-hardcore where you get the rah, kind of screamed vocals, and then you get a dime a dozen kind of breakdown right after, and then right after that you get all these really cheap, sugary, ultra clean vocals kind of swooping in like, oh yeah! When I'm listening to bands who do vocals like that, it's like listening to a million neon cats all fly into the music at once, crapping rainbows in every direction. Instead, this is some of the most raw, urgent, and emotionally intense rock music you're going to hear this year, I think. To start off with the production, I think it sounds great. The guitars are sounding fantastic on this LP. They're heavy, they're loud, they're blaring when these guys reach like mountainous climaxes, but also they have very quiet, subtle moments too, where the guitars just go soft and don't lose their flavor in the process. These guys have a lot of dynamics, and all of their energy translates perfectly through this record. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like I'm listening to a record. It just feels like I'm listening to these guys play live in the studio, just sort of like really in the moment. Now, the bass and drums sound great. They play a lot of fantastic grooves on this LP, and I can actually hear the bass on here, which I like a lot. And the vocals are in an amazing spot on this thing. They are so audible. I hear almost everything they're saying, but yet they don't feel too much louder than the rest of the music. Musically, I think this LP is pretty good too. It's very ambitious for a rock album of any style. To me, these guys remind me of some of my favorite old school post-hardcore bands, or emo bands, or screamo bands, like Rites of Spring, like Fugazi, because they have this very raw, gonna use that word again, intensity to them, energy to them. But they have this more modern and musically and emotionally and lyrically complex side of them that is totally within the new school of post-hardcore that's been around ever since bands like Refused and At the Drive-In sort of made it big. Yeah, some of the pounding build-ups do sound a little samey on a few tracks, but overall the guitars, the bass, the drums are just this perfect backdrop, the perfect dramatic backdrop for the vocals, the lyrics, the stories on this thing. And now we gotta talk about vocals, because I think these are what is going to make it or break it for a lot of you guys on this album. The front man for this band, Jordan Dreyer, I believe his name is, he is so bold and emotive and sincere with everything he says on this album. This dude's lyrics are very wordy and very specific. There's tons of imagery in everything he's saying, which makes me kind of feel like I'm watching a movie when I listen to some of these tracks, because when I'm following this dude's words, I'm thinking of all the things he's saying. Like St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church Blues, where he kind of just paints a picture of this church going into just major disrepair, losing its congregation, and kind of likening his loss of love for living and just his interest for life to that kind of faltering church. Or Edward BENZ, 27 Times, where he tells a story about this schizophrenic kid on pills, and there's a really intense, like, twist ending at the track I See Everything, where he's just talking about this cancer patient and kind of giving the progress of his deterioration over these specific dates. Or probably the biggest song on here, King Park, where it's a track about a drive-by shooting, and eventually ends with a standoff with police that gets pretty... What's important is that this album didn't make me feel like, oh, I relate by, kind of being really vague about the situations it discusses. It made me feel like, oh, I understand, because it's so specific and so detailed. This album is kind of like an emotional exorcism for me. I imagine it is for the guys playing in this band. A lot of these vocals are just shouted, screamed, whispered, narrated. It's not just singing or fronting for the band, but it's acting. This album has a lot of stuff kind of beating down on it, but it's determined to survive to the next day, to a day when things are better, when things are nicer. I'm feeling a decent to strong 8 on this. A lot of flavor to this. What do you think about this thing? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Why? And what do you think I should, review next? Anthony Fantano, La Dispute, Forever.